follow traffic, clear visual approach, runway 4 right, maintain 17 John Austin 5 mile final. 17 till 5 out.
Addressing one of the top safety challenges for small flight operations. From the National Business Aviation Association, this is Flight Plan, brought to you by Varion, formerly ATP. I'm Rob Finfrock with your trusted source for the very latest business aviation news and information. One of the most common safety concerns facing business aviation is the risk of departing the end or side of the runway surface. In fact, runway excursions comprise as much as 1/3 of all accidents involving business aircraft, making them the single most common safety incident across our industry, and smaller flight operations in particular appear particularly susceptible. To delve into this issue, I'm pleased to welcome back our panelists from our earlier episode that addressed leadership in small flight operations. David Keyes is Vice Chair of NBAA's Domestic Operations Committee and Chief Pilot for Peace River Citrus Products. And Joe Samuedowski serves as Co-Chair of the NBAA Small Flight Department Subcommittee. And Joe, I think this discussion ties into that earlier conversation because leadership and professionalism certainly drive safety across our industry. To start us off, what factors can lead to a runway excursion?
I think there's a couple factors. Unstabilized approaches is a big one, along with get-there-itis, as we know it, and planned continuation bias. Continuing on with an approach or continuing to a point of arrival that despite all the signals telling us it's not a good idea to continue, we continue anyway. And I think both of these stem from a general lack of planning and preparation. I think that that's an area that small operators, that there is definitely room for improvement. That includes all of us. We've all had situations that we've learned from, and if we take a step back, we can point to times where we could have done better. But the idea is to take from that and learn from it. And there's lots of tools and resources out there for us to use to help mitigate these risks of runway excursions.
Our side of the industry is experiencing on average one runway excursion a week over the last couple of years. So it is definitely probably our largest safety challenge for, once again, small operators. If you look at the operators that are having the excursions, it's typically small flight department, Part 91. The 91Ks and the 135 folks aren't experiencing it nearly as much as just the straight 91 because they have the safety mechanisms in place. I think one of the biggest keys to runway excursions is the lack of knowledge on runway performance. I just went through Recurrent and we spent zero time on performance. So a pilot is not receiving adequate training in what data goes into creating the right runway length number. And so different approaches are trying to be taken to start educating pilots on, what is the data telling you? When you put it in the FMS, what's that number really telling you? When you go into the charts, how many pilots go into the charts when they're flying? Probably none. And you've got a wet runway with a little bit of a tailwind. And, what should your runway length actually be? So I think it's an education issue that we need to address within our industry. And then I think it is the professionalism issue. I think it's a matter of the approach, like, well, we've always just done this before, so we'll do it again. And the conditions change a little bit and you find yourself approaching the end of the runway still doing 60 knots. So I think it's a both and. And if you're going to be a professional, you should take the time to learn about the performance of your airplane. But we seem as an industry, we don't put a lot of priority on it, or there's a lot of confusion, which is even more. If you ever want to have an interesting discussion in a crew lounge, bring up second segment climb or takeoff performance, and you'll have as many different pilots there are different opinions on what that is. So I think as an industry, we need to come together and look at runway performance and how to determine the best practices.
We'll be back in just a moment after this word from our sponsor.
Take your aviation operations to new heights. Introducing Varion, formerly known as ATP, your ultimate partner in achieving maximum aircraft uptime. At Varion, we understand the challenges faced by everyone in aviation. Our industry-leading technology solutions revolutionize aircraft management, so there's no more waiting, no more wondering, and no more wasted effort. Get real-time visibility of your maintenance, inventory, operations, and regulatory data right at your fingertips with an easy-to-use system, backed by a team of experts with deep aviation knowledge offering 24/7, 365 support. After 50 years in the business, we have built a growing reputation for getting our customers more aircraft uptime. That's why thousands of aircraft operators worldwide have already discovered the power of Varion. Say goodbye to downtime and hello to increased efficiency and profitability. Visit Varion.com to learn more. Varion, let's get you more uptime.
We're back now with Joe Samudovsky and David Keys, and our discussion about preventing runway excursions in small flight departments. David, continuing with your comments from before the break, you mentioned that we see a higher number of runway excursions in Part 91 ops than we do in fractional or 135 operations. Why do you think that is?
Number one is that they have a regulatory requirement to have a longer runway. So they depending on their operation, 20% or 40%. So when they run their runway numbers, they have a built-in safety margin that we're not required to have as a Part 91 operator. So that in and of itself will help the charter and the 91K guys and gals have a safer runway landing performance. So most of it's regulatory. Then I think they're also both the 135, 91K the 135 required, the 91K also do more training. They have check airmen. They have people that ride along every year or 6 months and check the captains. They have more training requirements in the simulator. So they're getting more oversight than, if it's a two-person Part 91 flight department, we have no oversight. It's just the two pilots. So it's opinion on us to look at what the performance is. Are we doing it right? Are we the number that's coming out of the box, is that the number that's really true? Or are we making the numbers fit the runway, which I've seen so many times? Like, okay, we have a 5,000-foot runway. Oh, the box says if I put in a 1.67 factor, we need 7,000. Well, I'll just make it 1.1. Oh, now we only need 5,000. Okay, let's go. So there's a lot of confusion on the Part 91 side and lack of regulatory requirements.
Joe, what are your thoughts?
I do agree with everything Dave said. It certainly is regulatory, and also compared to larger operators, small Part 91 flight departments just don't have the checks and balances that the larger operators do, with a dedicated safety department, possibly a second pair of eyes with dispatchers that are doing releases for each flight, and well-developed and continually improving SOPs. That being said, it just becomes more important for the small flight departments and pilots, as Dave said, to educate ourselves up on what the requirements are, and using tools available to us to make sure we are meeting the performance requirements and utilizing airports that have enough runway for our airplane.
So how do we mitigate that risk, Joe?
One of the first steps is to realize that we can't control every single risk. We can mitigate the risk before each flight to as low as possible. But if we understand that on any given flight there can be risks that pop up that we just can't control or maybe not be accounted for prior to departing, once we realize that, I think that sort of forces us to take an attitude of having a backup plan. Having more options. More options give us plenty more room to work with when the weather starts deteriorating at our destination, so that we're not forced with continuing to land when the performance of the aircraft says otherwise. I think that goes back to planning and preparation. And then also another thing is discipline. Discipline in maintaining a stabilized approach or implementing stabilized approach criteria and sticking to it. We had a great discussion at one of our recent small flight department subcommittee calls, and one of the members brought up that in a lot of people that he flies with, this was somebody involved in the training segment, that a lot of pilots don't brief a go-around and what the procedures are and and what it's going to sound and look like. And I think that's a very important point, because if we brief doing a go around, we're sort of spring loaded to be able to do it, so that it's not a surprise if suddenly we have to go around, if it's maybe not even performance or related to the condition of the runway. It could just be something as simple as there's a broken aircraft on the runway or something like that. And then again, that also goes back to just planning and preparation.
I think an easy fix for the Part 91 arena is add 15%. Get your runway numbers and add 15%. We would prevent probably most of the runway excursions if they had just done that. So I think that's an easy fix when you look at all the numbers and run the data. Add 15% to the number you come up with. And if you can land in that, then go for it. And if you can't, then really ask the question, what can we mitigate? Is there a way we can mitigate? Can we land into the wind? The runway's wet. Do we change our configuration? What can we do? Or then we make the decision, maybe we need to not land there, given what kind of airplane you're flying. Some airplanes have better braking systems than others. And so if you're in one of those that doesn't brake so well, it doesn't have reversers, then maybe you think, okay, but we're not going to land there this time. But I think the 15% is a really easy first step for operators.
What guidance is out there to help small operators avoid runway excursions, Dave? What steps can they take?
Stabilized approach criteria. Come up with it within your department. Talk it over with your other pilot. What are our stabilized approach criteria? And we're moving away from the 1,000 and 500 mark in the industry. We're getting it a little closer to the runway, because typically we find we have the I can save it attitude if I'm not stabilized on those gates. And once we pass that gate, our mental process is, well, I'm not gonna go around because I can save it. So, but if you lower the gate, say to 200 feet, and if you're not stabilized at 200 feet, and that's, you pick it that as your number, then go around, but abandon the approach and come back and shoot it again. That and adding 15% would probably resolve 90% of the runway excursions.
This discussion is really timely. The FAA just published a revised advisory circular that's 91-79B, which covers aircraft landing performance and runway excursion mitigation. This is a revision to the previous version of the advisory circular that was published back in 2014. But in the new revision, there's an emphasis on doing time of arrival landing distance assessments, which is basically doing exactly what Dave suggested, and which is adding 15%. And that's to, if we get to the arrival airport with multiple runways and we're going to be landing on a runway that we didn't think we would be landing on, or potentially having to go to an alternate, doing an en route landing assessment for that arrival airport, or we get to the runway and we planned that it was going to be a dry runway when we got there, but a rain shower moved through. It's now wet. So if we're landing at a runway that we didn't plan to, or the condition has changed other than what we had originally planned for, add 15%. That's a safety buffer. And the advisory circular also talks about aircraft performance considerations and also offers information to develop SOPs to mitigate landing risks. And so I really think that advisory circular should be required reading for really flight departments of any size, but especially for small Part 91 flight departments.
Dave, I understand the Domestic Operations Committee will soon be publishing guidance on preventing runway excursions as well.
Yeah, it's in review with a bunch of different committees and people, but a runway excursion document that's going to give some tangible things you can do and concept. We hope to have that published in the next month or so. The other thing I'll tell you just quickly, Rob, is with the advent of more economical flight data monitoring systems becoming available, small departments should consider adding that to their safety mix. I mean, they could do it in a way that it doesn't have to get reported to a bigger entity, or it's just in-house data that shows them how they're doing and provides a kind of a third-party eye, if you would say, what kind of approaches are you doing? Or is the airplane stabilized? Are you having any difficulty and that type of thing? Prior, that was fairly costly, but I think the cost of that is coming down and there are options. So I would encourage small departments to look into flight data monitoring. Once again, if there's a fear of reporting it to a larger entity, we'll just do it in-house. Just have it report to you, and you don't have to share the data.
Great point, David. Joe, what else would you like to add?
Well, much like in our discussion about leadership, getting involved is just another great way to figure out what other flight departments are doing. There's a lot of variety in the way small flight departments operate and their overall missions, but it's a great way to see what others are doing and being able to take bits and pieces of all these other different operators out there and incorporate it into your own department and making it work for your own way.
Be on the lookout for that document from the DOC that Dave mentioned. And NBAA's Safety Committee has also done extensive work on this subject, with a variety of resources available to help operations of all sizes to prevent runway excursions and increase the safety of ground operations. Be sure to check them out at nbaa.org/runway excursions. On Monday, October 16th, just before the start of NBAA's Business Aviation Convention and Exhibition in Las Vegas, Nevada, the Small Operator Symposium will also examine runway excursions and other safety considerations for small operators. Learn more about that event at nbaa.org/BACE. That's BACE. And that's the latest from the National Business Aviation Association. Remember, you can subscribe to all Flight Plan episodes at Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Spotify, or wherever you find your favorite podcasts, including by asking your virtual assistant or connected device. Of course, you can also download Flight Plan directly from nbaa.org. I'm Rob Finfrock. Thanks for listening, and be sure to join us next time for a new episode of Flight Plan.
Right base, sending out 3500.
All right, we got him inside. We're still in effect 170, coming.